President Obama's Theology. The Theology of President Obama's Christian Theocracy. Part 2. Liberation Theology's Theological Method. As we continue examining the theology of President Obama, we do so in order that we might better understand what is driving the president's political, social, and cultural policies in America. Only then can we understand how we must respond. Liberation theology is not about theory, but it is actually about doing theology, what is also called praxis. And this requires the theologian to be immersed in his or her own intellectual and socio-political history. It should be pointed out that while liberation theology is anti-individualistic, its theological method of personal, intellectual, and socio-political history is directly related to the individual's own personal or subjective state. For the liberation theologian, theology is not a system of timeless truth, engaging the theologian in the repetitious process of systemization and political and apologetical argumentation. Rather, theology is a dynamic and an ongoing exercise involving contemporary insights into human knowledge, existence, and history. Liberation theology is an epistemological, that is, a self-conscious exercise of one's race, whatever that race may be, in the context of a sociological analysis of his story, of his history, of his life as he is currently living it. In this context, one can see why praxis means more than just the application of theological truth to any given situation. Rather, it means the discovery and the formation of theological truth out of a given historical situation, a historical context, through personal participation in the class struggle for a new socialist society. Two critical elements shape liberation's theological biblical hermeneutic. The first element comes from the philosophical perspective begun by Immanuel Kant, which argues for the autonomy of human reason. Theology is no longer worked out in response to God's self-disclosure through the divine human authorship of the Bible. This is why we are not to be worried about whether or not our policies or politics are biblical, said the President in the National Prayer Breakfast speech. Rather, we should worry if our values are common to all men as they are experiencing them currently and concurrently in their lives. This revelation from outside is replaced by the revelation of God found in the matrix of human interaction with history. Thus, it is no longer an external, supernatural revelation, but a personal, individual revelation of self-actualization and analysis of each individual's life and context of how they are living. The second element comes from the political view developed by Karl Marx, which argues that man's wholeness can be realized only through overcoming the alienating political and economic structures of society. Liberation theologians agree with Marx's famous statement. Hitherto, says Marx, philosophers have explained the world. Our task is to change it. They argue that theologians are not meant to be theoreticians. Rather, they are to be practitioners engaged in the struggle to bring about society's transformation. Again, think the theology of change. In order to do this liberation theology, it must employ a Marxist-style class analysis, which divides the culture between oppressors and the oppressed, sometimes also referred to in our society as the haves versus the have-nots. This sociological analysis of conflicts between those oppressed and the oppressors, the have and the have-nots, is meant to identify the injustices and exploitation within the historical context. currently being lived out and has in its past been lived out in society. In this way, both Marxism and liberation theology condemn religion for supporting the socio-political and economic status quo, as well as legitimizing the power of the oppressor. Thus, a war will be taken out on that type of Christianity from those who follow liberation theology. Because supporting any political theory that tends to oppress and suppress must be seen, where it lifts up the individual as being a false religion, a bad theology, an evil theology by men. That's why you see such rejection to any form of Christianity that promotes free market political teaching. However, there is a difference in thought between Marxism and liberation theology. Unlike Marxism, liberation theology turns to the Christian faith, the visible church, as a means for bringing about the liberation of society and creating a new world order where there is equality and social justice among all the people. You should know that the liberation theologians claim that they are not departing from ancient Christian tradition when they use Marxist thought as a tool for social analysis and the development of a liberal fascist governmental system, or what we know better as the welfare state, where entitlements are designed to bring about the necessary injustices to make the playing field equal for all. Thus, it's not equal opportunity, but equal results that is being sought by liberation theology. Thus, wherever you find entitlements, you find some form of statism. And in this case, it is a statism that is clearly socialistic with Marxist fingerprints all over top of it. Therefore, since liberationism is a view of doing theology, now you can see what that means, not doing a theory of theology, but doing theology. That is, it is seeking to liberate the poor and the oppressed. It is seeking to help the marginalized of our society. Maybe this becomes more clear in light of the President's National Prayer Breakfast speech now. But there is an important point to be made here concerning liberation theology. It was developed in Latin America, and that is on a continent where the majority is both poor and Roman Catholic. Liberation theology claims the struggle is with man's inhumanity to man, not with unbelief. Thus, liberation theologians in this way have carved out a special place for the poor and oppressed. And for them, that is the central theme of the real gospel. And in this way, it is a social gospel with Marxist underpinnings. Thus, for the church, the Christian church, all communion with God is predicated on opting for the poor and the exploited classes, identifying with their plight and sharing in their fate. Hence, we are forced to understand God from within history, mediated through the lives of oppressed human beings. This means that God is not recognized in His revelation of His Word, or as witnessed in creation's beauty and power. But dialectically, it is in the culture's suffering and despair in which God alone can properly be known.